So if there are some questions, well, I have a question for Oliver, if you will. I was very taken by your contrast of schema and model. And I wondered if you could simply maybe restate or clarify for me the distinction between the two and the specific problem with schema and the specific solution that a model brings to this problem of the schema.
So the problem with the schema is that we don't have a method in Badiou's philosophy. Never mind in Badiou's philosophy, there is no method for moving from a so-called given particular concrete situation and the schema that is its set. And Badiou in no way in being an event commits to the idea of there being given concrete empirical situations. He simply says there are non-ontological situations, which means there are other discourses apart from set theory. So the problem is that this problem, like mushroomed in the English-speaking commentary on Badiou's work. I mean, Berankova, for example, calls it Hallward's problem. Like when it actually came up in the defense in your viva, and you said yes, that's Peter Hallward's problem, right? Because people expected logics of worlds somehow to make more concrete the set theory apparatus in being an event. Of course it didn't. It exacerbated the abstraction. So we don't have the language. And second of all, the problem of schematism is the empiricist assumption that there is such a thing as given concrete situations, which a theory then comes along and tries to model. And Badiou very elegantly dismisses that entire option in his 1969 book, The Concept of Model, which offers a critique of positivist epistemology in both Norbert Wiener and in various philosophies of science concerning this whole idea of theory as a model. Modeling using a mathematical concept is where you already have a theory and you produce a model of the theory by importing the syntax of the theory into a semantic field that is pre-constituted in a certain sense. And then you try and reproduce the syntax and the operations of that theory within the semantic field. Okay? Hence, the appearance that the meta-ontology in being event is some kind of translation of what's occurring in ZFC set theory. Now, the advantage of this is what you do is you produce a new object. Okay? And that's another reason why you have this suspicion of arbitrariness. Whereas the argument I was trying to make is that it's not a question of arbitrariness. What you actually have is the contingency of truth procedures, which is being reproduced in this philosophical operation. And the other thing is part of the freedom of Badiou's work is that it is ontologically extravagant. And it does multiply decisions without clear calculable criteria. And that's what makes commentators uncomfortable. And I think the reason for that lack of comfort in the end is ideological.
Thanks.
So just to continue that thread in the conversation. So if modeling is something that is also to be justified within ontology, that means within mathematics, that means that modeling is, of course, a mathematical practice as well, and not just an external practice, then there must be relations of like splits within mathematics, a disunity in mathematics, which has a model relation. And there, I mean, Jana just presented one, which is, for example, a relation between classes and sets, and kind of dualities within mathematics that are irreconcilable. So would that be kind of part of the bad feeling one may have about all these strong decisions, that they don't reconcile those differences?
Yes, I would say if you adopt the strategy of modeling, it immediately entails that there's multiple modeling, And precisely what I call an anatomy of failure is supposed to explore disjunctions in between models, or in between the ontologies that are generated by those models. So it's an attempt to refuse the reconciliation of different ontologies. I mean, that's within my own project. Okay? But I would just say, just with regard to this methodological suggestion I'm making with regard to Badiou's work, there's absolutely no problem that you have a multiplicity of models.
Yeah, I think, well, this is a little bit, also we have always the question to understand what kind of thing is justified by the mathematical apparatus and what kind of things are justified by the philosophical sort of decisions, what you have also alluded to in your talk, Oliver. I think sometimes when we talk about it, and I ask Alain, okay, is this coming from is this particular decision that being is composed of multiplicities and the one does not exist, can you justify that mathematically? He says, no, this is a philosophical axiom. So I think that's also the thing of the construction of the formal system of philosophy. At some moment, I think Badiou somehow seems to me to parallel also the construction of mathematics, because at some moment you have to accept, okay, this is my philosophical axiom, and from this axiom I'm going to construct this huge, philosophical system. But obviously, since it is an axiom and we know the Gödel's theorem, we cannot sort of just justify it. Really, this is the affirmative aspect of thinking, that you have these things that, in a sense, I would say these philosophical axioms subjugate the mathematical apparatus to philosophy by saying this is a philosophical decision. So I would say in Badiou's oeuvre, mathematics is always subjugated by these philosophical decisions, philosophical axioms, like being is, multiplicities of multiplicities and so on.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Jana. So one of the kind of results of being an event is a way of reflexively accounting for the difference between being, nature, order, regular sizes, and then the subject, truth, the indiscernible, the unconstructible, right? And whenever there are some questions that can be solved really easily just by pointing to this distinction. But in this case, there seems to be a different kind of distribution, let's say, of the relation between nature and truth, right? Because in the first volume, they're like exclusive of each other, right? Like nature and the subject are totally, separate. And so it seems like in this case, you have truth as a kind of, it's like an attribute thinking through the absolute total V, right? And the total V would be, in the first volume, all the regular, well-behaved sets, which would be nature, natural hierarchy, right? So why would the totality of that have any, maybe I'll have to read the book, but obviously we'll have to, but that just strikes me as kind of somehow contradictory with the first book. Maybe Alain can answer this, but you've read the book, so maybe you can indicate some things about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand well your question, but it seems to me that the V, it doesn't bring the notion of totality back to play, because precisely the V is the absolute class. This is really like it's almost like somehow, comme how he was saying, sur quoi se prélèvent les objets mathématiques. It's almost like the inconsistent background of all thinkable forms of the multiple from which we abstract the mathematical object. So it's very much also a meta-mathematical thinking here on this class absolu V. So it's really like from this inconsistent background from which you extract, from which you extract the mathematical objects as such to think them. Like you have sets is obviously the first level, and then the classes, which is somehow ambiguous because it's the way how mathematicians try to name the fact that there's no set of all sets, right? So they said, okay, it's not a set, but there's still a class because we can find a propriety, we can find some intentional characteristics and say, okay, this is an ordinal, so we'll have class of all ordinals that are dispersed in different sets. So it's really like it's a...
But it seems like they would all be the well-behaved, I mean, they might not be consistent one with the other, but they're all sort of obeying the law, I mean, the general syntactical laws and all the nice properties of ZFC. And that seems like that would be nature with no gaps and no holes in it. And then, you know, the truth sort of is outside of that. I mean, truth is an exception of that. No?
Why won't you read it as nature?
Because he's confusing the constructible hierarchy with V. And V includes those four kinds of infinity as well, some of which are not constructible.
I think. It's not V, this is precisely that V doesn't equal L, so V is not constructible.
Yeah, no, sure, okay.
I don't know, I just don't get why you try to equal it with nature, but maybe Badiou can say something. No, you know the book, so you should say something.
So I have a purely mathematical question or suggestion, as you like. I mean, about ultrafilter. There is a ultrafilter. I mentioned long ago that there is a connection with Boole's theory of logic and probability. And in probability, there are a number of laws which are called 0-1 law, which were discovered by Paul Levy and other ones. And so it means a situation where you have everything is probabilistic, but the only outcome is that probability is 0, so it's almost false, or almost false, or 1, almost 2 in the language of probability, almost true, almost false. So, and that's an alternative to ultrafilter, and which is mathematically well established, and which could provide maybe some insight about probabilistic meaning of all this concept. Just a suggestion, I have no, and we could discuss it. So.
Yeah, no, I was here really just mentioning the mathematical apparatus that was really in this particular book. So obviously, I understand that there are different mathematical point of view, but I was here really just quoting Badiou what kind of mathematics he was using here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jana, one of the doubts I have is about the situation of the subject in L'Immanence des Vérités. And if I'm not mistaken, in the question period in New York after the Élogie des Mondes presentation, Alain Badiou said that the subject is no longer part of his preoccupation, that he, if I'm not mistaken, dealt with the topic of subject, and in L'Immanence des Vérités, as you've presented it, in any case, there's no subject that is conceptualized, and this seems to me to give the impression that there is no gap and that there's no emergence. I wonder if there's still an event in L'Immanence des Vérités.
Well, I think Badiou presupposes that these things are already known from in his previous books. Like, you have a pretty good definition of the event, you have a very detailed definition of the subject. Here, I think he's trying to obviously these terms sort of re-emerge, but I'd say this is not the main focus of the book, because the main focus is really to understand how these things like the subject, the event, and so on are linked to the attributes of the absolute. So obviously these things are still here. They did not disappear. I think he presupposes that we all know this, but then he's trying to add a complementary point to precisely really, I think, really think through the different forms of infinities. And in the first half of the book, you also have what I said. There are 4 kinds of finitudes, and that's where actually you have when he in the book when he speaks about recouvrement, the way how you can have some form of infinity being sort of recovered by the finitude of a constructible set. You have these things, these terms that re-emerge all the time. So they did not disappear in a sense. They are still there, but I would say it's providing a slightly different perspective. That means, okay, we had the universality, we had the singularity, and now let's try to think what are the attributes of the absolute, or what kind of infinities. In a sense, large cardinals are related to those truth procedures and the incorporations of those truth procedures by the subject. So I think these things did not disappear, but it's just a slightly different perspective. Yeah.
I think, in the interest of time, we'll pause now to take a break. We can happily maybe get some coffee and come back for more and pursue any other questions also from the morning.